Picture this. One of the world's largest megacities is literally disappearing underwater right now as you watch this video. And Indonesia's solution? Build an entirely new capital city in the middle of the jungle. This is the most ambitious urban project on Earth, and it's facing a crisis that might turn it into the world's most expensive ghost town. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Jakarta is a megacity holding over 33 million people in its greater metropolitan area. That's more than the entire population of Australia, crammed into one massive urban zone. It's the largest city in Southeast Asia and one of the most densely packed places on Earth. But here's the terrifying part. The ocean is now higher than the city's coastline. Stand on the shores of North Jakarta today, as verified in November 2025, and you'll see something apocalyptic. Seawater literally towering above the land, held back only by concrete barriers that are raised higher every single year. The numbers are shocking. Parts of North Jakarta are sinking 25 to 30 centimeters every year. That's nearly 1 foot annually. It's the fastest sinking major city in the world. Scientists from the Bandung Institute of Technology estimate that 1/4 of Jakarta will be completely underwater by 2050. That's just 25 years away. And it gets worse. Jakarta's population density has reached 22,000 people per square kilometre in some areas. Imagine trying to fit the entire population of Texas into the area of Rhode Island. The traffic is so bad that drivers spend more than 1/4 of their time just sitting still, with an average of 33,000 stops and starts per year, the highest in the world. The city loses $6.5 billion annually just from traffic congestion alone. So what's causing this disaster? It's not just climate change, though rising sea levels don't help. The real culprit? Us. Or rather, groundwater extraction. For decades, Jakarta's 30+ million residents have been pumping water from underground because the city doesn't have adequate piped water infrastructure. Every time someone drills a well, whether for a home, factory, or office building, they're essentially sucking out the natural support system beneath the city. The ground is made of soft, alluvial soil that naturally compacts, but this massive groundwater extraction has turned it into a sinking catastrophe. Jakarta sits on what's basically a giant sponge, and we've been squeezing it dry for 50 years. The result? Sea walls that need to be continuously raised. A coastline that's disappearing. And a ticking time bomb. Former Jakarta Governor Basuki Tjahajapurnama, known as a hawk, warned that if the coastal barriers failed during a high tide, floodwaters could surge all the way to the National Monument in central Jakarta. That's 10 kilometers inland. This isn't a future simulation, it's history. In early 2020, Jakarta experienced one of its worst floods in modern history. 66 people were killed, and nearly 400,000 were displaced. Entire neighborhoods vanished underwater. Families lost everything. And experts warn the next flood will be worse. So Indonesia made a decision that sounds absolutely insane. Abandon the capital and start over. Enter Nusantara, an ancient Javanese word meaning archipelago. It's not just a new government building. It's an entirely new capital city being carved out of the jungles of East Kalimantan on the island of Borneo, 2,000 kilometers away from Jakarta. This is nation building on a scale we haven't seen since Brasilia in the 1960s or Washington, D.C. in the 1790s. The specs are mind-boggling. Total area, 2,560 square kilometers, nearly 4 times the size of Jakarta and twice the size of New York City. Total cost, $35 billion. That's roughly the entire GDP of countries like Kenya or Panama. Timeline, 5 phases stretching until 2045. Indonesia's 100th independence anniversary. Target population, 1.9 million people by 2045. Construction began in July 2022, and here's where it gets interesting. As of late 2025, the presidential palace stands completed, a gleaming symbol of ambition. On August 17, 2024, Indonesia held its 79th Independence Day ceremony at this magnificent structure for the first time, marking a historic milestone. President Jokowi presided over the ceremony at a palace ready for Indonesia's future. But step outside the government core and the reality is starkly different. The city is still largely dirt roads, half-finished buildings and construction cranes stretching to the horizon. Currently, only about 2,000 civil servants and 8,000 construction workers live in Nusantara, nowhere near the 1.2 million targeted for 2030. Here's where the story gets complicated. The project has attracted approximately $4 billion in private investment as of mid-2025, but that's far short of what's needed. The original plan was for the government to fund only 20%, with private investors covering the rest. But investors are hesitating. Why? Desperate for funding, in July 2024, President Jokowi's government offered investors land rights for up to 190 years, essentially selling off chunks of the country for nearly 2 centuries just to get this city built. That's longer than the United States has existed as a nation. But in November 2025, just weeks ago, Indonesia's Constitutional Court dropped a bombshell. They ruled that land rights in Nusantara must be capped at 95 years maximum, cutting the original offer in half. This decision sent shockwaves through the investment community and immediately raised questions about the government's ability to honour long-term commitments. Major investors like SoftBank have already pulled out. And with this new court ruling slashing land tenure by half, more may follow. New President Prabowo Subianto, inaugurated in October 2024, has signalled he'll continue the project but has shifted priorities. His flagship free nutritious meal program for children is competing for the same budget. The funding allocated to Nusantara has been significantly reduced, from tens of trillions of rupiah to just a fraction of that. Some international observers are now calling it a potential ghost city in the making, a $35 billion monument to unfinished ambition. Phase 2 construction was announced in April 2025, focusing on infrastructure expansion. A 12-kilometre road network is being developed, and construction of the Parliament and Supreme Court complexes is underway. But the pace has slowed dramatically compared to the initial phase. So why build in the middle of Borneo's jungle? Strategic geography. Nusantara sits nearly in the geographical centre of Indonesia, a country of 17,000 islands stretching 5,000 kilometres from east to west. Jakarta is stuck on the far western edge on Java Island. The new capital will be more centrally located to represent all Indonesians. Lower disaster risk. Unlike Jakarta, Nusantara is 30 kilometres inland from the coast, largely protected from tsunamis and rising seas. East Kalimantan also sits outside major earthquake zones and volcanic activity, critical for a nation that sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Resource distribution. Java Island holds 56% of Indonesia's population on just 7% of its land. The government wants to drive development to other islands, and Borneo offers vast space and natural resources. Fresh start, building from scratch, allows Indonesia to create a smart city with green technology, sustainable design, and modern infrastructure, something impossible in congested, sinking Jakarta. The planned city includes solar panels, electric vehicles, green buildings, and 75% green space with forest preservation zones. It's being designed as a model for 21st century urban planning, a forest city that balances development with environmental preservation. But there's a darker side to this story that rarely makes headlines. The area selected for Nusantara wasn't empty jungle. It was home to Indigenous communities who have lived on that land for generations, as well as farmers and plantation workers. Many have been displaced with minimal compensation or consultation. The 2,560 square kilometre construction zone encompasses agricultural land, industrial plantations, oil palm estates, coal mines, and traditional villages. The Balik Pasar and other Indigenous groups, part of the Dayak population that makes up roughly 10% of East Kalimantan's 4 million residents, have reported losing ancestral lands and access to forest resources essential for their livelihoods. Environmental groups warn that clearing rainforest for a massive city threatens biodiversity and could accelerate deforestation in one of the world's most important carbon sinks. Borneo is home to endangered orangutans, sun bears, pygmy elephants, and thousands of unique species found nowhere else on Earth. Conservation scientists point out the cruel irony. Indonesia is building a new capital to escape climate disaster in Jakarta, while simultaneously destroying forests that help fight global climate change. There's also the question of environmental justice. Why should rural communities lose their land and forests so that government officials can have a gleaming new capital? The social cost extends beyond displacement. Local communities worry about cultural erosion, loss of traditional livelihoods, and being left behind as wealthy urbanites move into a modern city built on their ancestral lands. Here's something crucial that many people misunderstand. With 33 million people, you can't just evacuate a megacity. Jakarta will remain Indonesia's economic and business capital, home to its stock exchange, major corporations, banks, tech companies, and commercial hub. The city generates approximately 60% of Indonesia's GDP. Only the government functions, the president, parliament, ministries, and Supreme Court, are moving to Nusantara. Think of it like the relationship between New York and Washington, D.C., or Sydney and Canberra, or Mumbai and New Delhi. But Jakarta's existential problems remain urgent. The city is racing against time to solve its sinking crisis through multiple strategies: restricting groundwater extraction with heavy fines for illegal wells, building the Jatiluhur water supply system to provide piped water, constructing massive seawalls and the giant seawall project, though controversial and incomplete, restoring coastal mangroves to act as natural wave barriers, improving drainage systems and flood management infrastructure, implementing the National Capital Integrated Coastal Development Master Plan. The Jakarta administration has also accelerated work on the Siliwangi River Normalization Project to manage flooding from upstream. Still, experts from the Bandung Institute of Technology and international research institutions predict that even with these measures, significant portions of North Jakarta will be underwater within decades. The city is essentially in a race it may not be able to win. Some urban planners now talk about managed retreat, slowly moving vulnerable populations to higher ground over the coming decades while maintaining Jakarta's economic functions on safer terrain. Indonesia isn't alone in this capital-moving experiment. It's part of a global trend. Egypt is building a new administrative capital 50 kilometers east of Cairo, $58 billion. Malaysia moved from Kuala Lumpur to Putrajaya in 1999. Brazil moved from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia in 1960. Kazakhstan moved from Almaty to Astana in 1997. Myanmar moved from Yangon to Naypyidaw in 2006. Pakistan moved from Karachi to Islamabad in 1967. Countries move capitals for various reasons: to redistribute development, escape overcrowding, assert national identity, improve security, or, in Indonesia's case, because their current capital is literally sinking into the ocean. But history shows that relocating capitals is risky. Naypyidaw in Myanmar is often cited as a cautionary tale, a massive, expensive capital that feels empty and artificial, disconnected from the country's economic heart in Yangon. The question everyone's asking: will Nusantara follow Brasilia's successful model or Myanmar's ghost town disaster? The $35 billion price tag assumes that 80% will come from private investors. But as of late 2025, investment commitments are falling billions short of targets. Why are investors nervous? Political uncertainty. Indonesia has elections every 5 years. What happens if a future president decides Nusantara isn't a priority? Investors could be left holding expensive land in the middle of nowhere. Infrastructure gaps. Building in a remote jungle location means everything must be created from scratch. Airports, seaports, power plants, water systems, telecommunications. The upfront costs are astronomical. Lack of economic activity. Unlike Jakarta, which has a thriving economy that attracted people naturally, Nusantara is a government city. Without businesses and jobs, who will move there besides civil servants? The government initially planned to relocate 16,000 civil servants immediately and ask them to move voluntarily. The response? Widespread reluctance bordering on resistance. Many officials are finding creative ways to avoid the transfer. applying for exemptions, taking early retirement, or simply dragging their feet. Some have privately said they'll commute from Balikpapan, the nearest major city about 2 hours away, rather than actually live in Nusantara. This creates a potential disaster scenario. You build a beautiful capital city, but nobody wants to live there. Government offices stand empty. The city becomes what urban planners call a white elephant, an expensive project that serves no practical purpose. To address this, the government is considering mandatory transfers with financial incentives, higher salaries, housing allowances, and career advancement opportunities for those who move. But it's unclear if money alone will convince people to leave Jakarta's urban amenities for jungle isolation. Here's the ultimate irony that makes this story so complex. Indonesia is building Nusantara to escape a climate disaster in Jakarta, a city sinking due to environmental mismanagement and rising seas. But in doing so, they're clearing rainforest, displacing wildlife, and potentially accelerating the very climate change that's causing Jakarta's problems in the first place. Environmental impact assessments have raised red flags. Deforestation. Clearing thousands of hectares of tropical rainforest releases massive amounts of stored carbon. Biodiversity loss. Borneo's forests are critical habitat for endangered species. Water system disruption. Massive construction changes. Natural water flow patterns. Increased emissions. Building a city from scratch requires enormous amounts of concrete, steel, and fossil fuel energy. The government insists Nusantara will be a forest city with 75% green space, renewable energy, and zero carbon emissions by 2045. The master plan includes electric vehicle infrastructure, solar power, green building standards, and protected forest corridors. But environmentalists point out that even a green city requires destroying pristine forest to build. They argue it would be more sustainable to fix Jakarta's problems than create new environmental damage in Borneo. The counter-argument from the government, Jakarta's sinking is beyond repair. Without Nusantara, Indonesia's government will eventually face a catastrophic flooding event that could kill thousands and displace millions. The environmental cost in Borneo, while significant, is smaller than the human cost of staying in Jakarta. Who's right? That's the $35 billion question. So let's be brutally honest. Will Nusantara succeed or become the world's most expensive monument to hubris? The challenges are immense. Funding shortfalls. Private investment isn't meeting targets. Government budget is shrinking. Political uncertainty. Each new administration could change priorities or abandon the project. Reluctance to move. Civil servants don't want to leave Jakarta's amenities and opportunities. Environmental concerns. Rainforest destruction, biodiversity loss, and climate impact. Infrastructure gaps. Building roads, airports, utilities, schools, and hospitals. Takes decades economic viability. Without a natural economy, the city depends entirely on government will. Social justice issues. Indigenous displacement and lack of meaningful consultation. Legal instability, November 2025. Court ruling, cutting land rights in half, has shaken investor confidence. Historical precedents. Many planned capitals become expensive ghost towns. See Myanmar's Naypyidaw. But the alternative is terrifying. By 2050, 25% of Jakarta underwater means 8 million people become climate refugees. Economic losses from Jakarta's sinking could exceed $100 billion over the coming decades. A major flooding disaster during high tide could kill thousands and paralyze Indonesia's economy. The longer Indonesia waits, the more expensive and difficult relocation becomes. Without action, Jakarta becomes the world's first modern megacity to be abandoned due to climate disaster. So the Indonesian government sees no choice but to push forward, however imperfect the solution. 2022 to 2024. Phase 1 construction launched, July 2022. Presidential Palace and core government buildings completed, basic infrastructure established. Roads, power, water. Approximately 85 to 90% of Phase 1 complete. First Independence Day ceremony at Presidential Palace. August 17th, 2024. 2025. Current status. 2,000 civil servants and 8,000 workers on site. Phase 2 construction announced, April 2025. 12-kilometre road network under development, parliament and Supreme Court complexes under construction. $4 billion in private investment secured, well below targets. Government budget significantly reduced under President Prabowo Constitutional Court ruling, November 2025, cuts land rights to 95 years. Growing concerns about project momentum and funding gaps, 2026 to 2028. Projected, continued Phase 2. Infrastructure development. Target, first major wave of government ministry relocations. President Prabowo plans to begin working from Nusantara by 2028 critical period to demonstrate viability and attract more investment. 2030 goal, 1.2 million residents, currently on track to fall dramatically short. Full operational capacity of government functions. Self-sustaining city economy beyond government workers. 2045 vision. Fully completed city with 1.9 million people. Indonesia's 100th independence anniversary celebration in Nusantara. Complete transition of capital functions from Jakarta, zero carbon emissions, and full smart city implementation. The gap between vision and reality is enormous. Whether Indonesia can bridge that gap remains one of the 21st century's great uncertainties. Indonesia is attempting something extraordinary, building a capital city from scratch in the 21st century while racing against a climate catastrophe that's swallowing its current capital centimetre by centimetre. $35 billion, 2,560 square kilometres, 2,000 kilometres through the jungle. A 23-year timeline. It's ambitious. It's risky. It's controversial. It's expensive. It's environmentally destructive. It displaces Indigenous communities. The funding is collapsing. Investors are fleeing. The courts are cutting deals in half. And it might fail spectacularly. But when your capital city is sinking 25 to 30 centimetres a year, when the ocean stands higher than your coastline, when scientists predict 1/4 of your city will be underwater in 25 years, what choice do you have? This is what climate adaptation looks like in the 21st century. Not smooth, not perfect, not fair, but desperate and necessary. Nusantara represents both Indonesia's hope for the future and a stark warning about the consequences of unsustainable urban development. As Jakarta, Southeast Asia's largest city, slowly disappears beneath the waves, the race is on to build a new capital before it's too late. Will it work? The smart money says it'll be messy. The city will likely be completed, but decades late, billions over budget, and with a fraction of the originally planned population. It might become a hybrid, a functioning but underwhelming government centre that never quite becomes the gleaming smart city in the jungle that Indonesia envisions. Or maybe, just maybe, it'll succeed beyond expectations. Maybe Indonesia will prove that bold action, despite imperfections, is better than paralysis. Maybe Nusantara will become a model for how nations adapt to climate change. Check back in 2045. We'll know by then. But here's what we know right now in late 2025. The story of Indonesia's two capitals is more than just an infrastructure project. It's a preview of humanity's climate future. Jakarta won't be the last major city facing existential threats from rising seas and climate disasters. Miami, Bangkok, Shanghai, New Orleans, Lagos, dozens of coastal megacities are watching Jakarta's crisis and Indonesia's response. Because the uncomfortable truth is this: we've built our modern civilization on coastlines, and those coastlines are disappearing. In the coming decades, hundreds of millions of people will face the same choice Indonesia is facing now: adapt, relocate, or go underwater. So the next time someone tells you climate change is a future problem that we'll solve eventually, tell them about Jakarta, a city of 33 million people where the ocean already stands higher than the land, where the ground sinks 30 centimetres every year, and where an entire nation is spending $35 billion to move its capital 2,000 kilometres to the jungle. Tell them about the 66 people who died in the 2020 floods and the 400,000 who lost their homes. Tell them about the Indigenous communities losing their forests. Tell them about the civil servants who don't want to move. Tell them about the investors pulling out after the court slashed land rights in half. Tell them about the half-finished buildings standing in the Borneo jungle, waiting for a future that may or may not come. Tell them about the presidential palace, gleaming and ready, surrounded by nothing but mud, cranes, and uncertainty. The future isn't coming. It's already here. And it's complicated, messy, expensive, and happening right now. This is climate adaptation in real time. This is what it costs when we wait too long to act. This is what happens when 33 million people live on sinking land. And this is just the beginning. Because if Indonesia, with all its resources, political will, and decades of warning, is struggling this much to relocate one capital city, what happens when dozens of cities face the same crisis simultaneously? That's the question keeping urban planners awake at night. Jakarta is sinking. Nusantara is rising. And the whole world is watching to see which happens first and what it means for the rest of us.